relationships between pastors and church musicians. It's interesting territory. And for some of us, it's a wonderful and rich thing. And we're fortunate, like, I'm just going to name it, like I am, to have been so privileged to work with someone like George Mason. Now, many of you know he's retiring, has announced his retirement, and his last Sunday at Wilshire will be the first Sunday of May. And I, like some of you, though, have had other kinds of relationships with pastors. And I'll acknowledge that, sometimes that was my fault. Sometimes that was their fault. Sometimes it was just oil and water, as human relationships go. So I wanted, in part today, we want to talk a little bit about how to navigate this essential public relationship. And I'll start by saying, I learned from George a long time ago, he had described the relationship between pastors and ministers of music as sort of the emotional lightning rod of the church staff. And some of you have felt the heat of that lightning occasionally, and sometimes that's been a very painful thing. Timothy, as you've observed, let's just start generally speaking, and you're in your first pastorate, right, at Emerywood?
Yeah.
How long have you been there now?
5 years.
You've been gone 5 years?
I know, it's hard to believe it, right?
From Wilshire. He's been gone for 5 years. What have you observed, and maybe even in your
Love that guy.
in looking at your the landscape of your peers and other pastors, what have you observed in terms of the relationship, just the work, let's talk about working relationship between church musicians and pastors? Just thoughts.
If I'm looking at my peers, a lot of them don't do it well. Let's just put it out there. I have a great mentor who once told me, music ministers are the most beloved staff in all of the church. And so if you want hell, mess with the music minister. And I learned from that. And so I learned it from that, of trying to make sure that I am very close with my music minister. And my situation was very weird. When I first went to Emerywood, the thing they left out in all of our interviews was that they had 2 worship services that the week before I came, they decided to turn into one and blend it, and decide how we're going to blend that. That's up to you. And then the person was interim, and it kind of put me in an awkward place that I had to hire that person, even though it may not been the right fit and things going on.
Yeah.
And so the way that I work, I'm very collaborative. You are in a place in your position because you are intelligent and knowledgeable to be in there, and I don't need to work over you. That is your place and your job. I trust you to do that. And so in the same way, we're working in this together. And so we meet a couple of times a week just to make sure we're on that working relationship. But what I find with my peers, most of the time, the music minister is the last person that they're having a working relationship with. Because for some of them, they don't want to do worship planning, so they say, that's Doug's job. I don't need to worry about that. He's got it. We don't need to worry about it. Or, the youth are more important. The children are more important. I really need young adults in the church.
Yeah.
He or she's got the music. That's fine. Not realizing for us what was happening was that our largest set of people coming into the church was because of the choir. And so we had to learn to work with that, and also learning that if I am going to be working with this person and sermons or collaborating with hymns and music and themes and ideas, then we have to have a good working relationship, right? We're going to be seeing each other often in what we do. But it is, I would say, neglected by a lot of pastors.
So let's name the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
There is this thing called a power dynamic in these
Yeah.
relationships, right?
Yeah.
And also let's name it. I mean, it shows up in the paycheck.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So if the pastor is not coming to you to develop a working relationship, or is there any advice you could give us? I mean, it just occurs to me, what can we do if we don't quite have as much power in that power dynamic? If the pastor is not initiating a working relationship, is there? What do you think is appropriate for us?
That's a great question. I think that differs with every pastor, right?
Right.
I have a staff where I literally tell them if I'm doing something stupid, please say, Tim, that is a horrible idea.
And do they believe that?
Yes, because most of them do it.
Yeah.
In the end of service, when I'm about to say something, I have Caleb in the back going, don't say it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Stop. Many times the church musician, if I'm start talking, she'll just start playing. So it's like, thank you, Marshall, you cleared that up. I did not need to do that at all. So that is my relief, but that's not the same with others. But I think in that power dynamic, that's a hard, that really is.
It is.
Because
it's tricky.
Because, here's the thing. You all are going to pastor people that I'm not going to pastor. And I'm okay with that. You're going to be closer to them than I am. You're going to be in their homes and at their tables. And sometimes I'm the last one they want to talk to. I have 3 choir members where they're like, I hate you. I'm only here to sing John Rudder. Rudder. And I don't want to hear anything you got to say. And I'm like, you know what? That's good. I love you too. And so the dynamics, though, between them of how to go to that, I think just really going to that person, being honest. And I believe that vulnerability is key to a lot of things. And we lack that as ministers so often because we don't have ego in other places, right? No. But if we are vulnerable with each other and realizing that my weaknesses are going to be some of your strengths, right? You're going to know those pieces. You're going to know those things. And how we can work together is realizing the differences of what we can hold together in that relationship. And so sometimes just being honest. And that's probably not the best answer. That's probably not really helpful. But it's hard because every senior minister is different.
Yeah. I really appreciate the space for lament last night for a lot of folks in this room. You and I had this conversation that, and you actually touched on it in a beautiful way because you listened to what I said on the phone a couple of weeks ago when we talked, that, some of us are working with smaller choirs, maybe small or no choir at all. And we wonder if we're going to be needed. And that's scary, because we've got kids to put through college or mortgages to pay. And so thank you for creating some space for us to weep, before we'll dance again because that's what we do, But there is a time to mourn, and we're still trying to figure out when we're going to come out of this tunnel. And that's not just about choirs, but it's about the wide scope of everything we've done, everything that we've known. In some ways related to music ministry.
Can I say something to the needed piece?
Yeah.
So my preaching professor is Tom Troger. And I love that man. He's a dear mentor of mine. And if you know Tom, he has a bow tie and his pants all the way up to here, and he's just as happy as can be. I love Tom. And so all of our preaching classes, though, you had to have your sermon paired with music. So because he wrote hymns, a lot of times we had to write hymns to go along with our sermon. So it was always that the music was working side by side with the homily. But something that he said that I've never forgotten is that through every pastor's tenure, there is a song to define it. So meaning, I asked this to George once, and I can't remember if it was Be Thou My Vision, or I think it was Be Thou My Vision. And that is the leading of word, that theology of that song is what's the tune, the music that is moving through those years. And for me, we'll sing it tomorrow. I love it, love it, love it. Because I first heard it from you. What are we singing tomorrow?
Is it the Tom Training?
For everyone born, a place at the table. So we at our church sing it probably every month. Like, this is the song, this is what is moving us through, this is the theology that is taking place of who we are. But it cannot be done without you, right?
Yeah.
This tune, this music, this theology, this movement cannot be done without the music minister, right? As Teresa Fry Brown says, there is no movement that can be done alone, and there is no prophet that can be prophetic without being with people, being collaborative together. And so we as pastors need you, right? You are needed and you are loved, but not just as pastors we need you. Our congregations need you. Our children, our youth, our adults need you. Because without you, we don't have that song to carry us through. And so please know how important you are to us, even on those days when I just go to my office and slam the door, and annoyed by all the things of the world. You matter deeply.
Thank you. Thank you for that blessing. Yeah, I think, did we venture into what is my favorite film, the Roberto Benigni, Life is Wonderful, the Italian film? You know Life is Wonderful from years ago, and I still am unpacking that movie after all of these years. This idea, this playful relationship of a father to a child, and they end up in a concentration camp, and it just makes my mind explode that life is so horrible and so wonderful, sometimes within just a breath of each other. And so I don't know, can you say a word about how to help us, and that includes me, how to help us just navigate life and both mourn and dance? In other words, the paradox of those two things, to pick up on your wisdom literature scripture.
How to navigate life in the mourning and the dancing. So I'm black. So every church that I've worked in has been predominantly a wealthy white church, upper class, right? You know, Embry-Wood Baptist Church is on Country Club Road, 3 blocks down the road, with pure white carpet. We are as white as you can be. But I grew up in Black Baptist Pentecostal space. And what I learned, having pastors as uncles all throughout, and my grandfather was a big pastor that would sit down with Oral Roberts and often and talk and all of these things. And so what I learned from the church I grew up in and the churches that I've worked in is that the churches, with all due respect, that I've worked in, we like to control the spirit. We want the spirit to be done at 12 p.m. because we got to get to Luby's, K&W, right? We need to put a timestamp on how the spirit is going to work, and it's going to work through these certain words, and I need to get them done in this amount so that I can put it on and everybody can hear that, and that's enough, right? And yes, while I disagree having worship for 4 hours long growing up, one of the things that I learned was the beauty of letting the spirit flow. That if I mess up, it's all right. If I come up with a different sermon that is not printed with the scripture in there, that's okay, because we got the Bible sitting in the pew, and I can pick it up and read that scripture that I'm going to use instead. Sometimes the Spirit works in different ways, and sometimes the Spirit, not sometimes, all times, the Spirit will work in our mourning and our dancing. And if we allow it, and sometimes we have to push back from our control, push back from the ways that we expect things and think things have to happen, and realize maybe that too was the divine Spirit of God. Because we have been known and heard that this Spirit is called holy, but often we don't trust in its holiness. And so I think for me as a pastor, it is letting go of some of that control and realizing I can navigate through life and the unknown because I know God's Spirit is with me. And it's going to be okay. All shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well.
That's right. Yeah. What advice would you give us? Let's loop back almost to where we started. We are people of agency, even if we feel like we recognize the power dynamic, and even if that's unequal. Okay. But we do have agency. What would you advise us to do to cultivate? I guess let's go back to being that practical working relationship. What can we do to cultivate a positive working relationship? Let's say even if things are not great, they haven't been great.
Yeah.
Okay, it's been awkward. We've stepped on each other's toes, or maybe worse. What can the church musician do?
Yeah. Find ways to deepen those relationships. And what I say this is from the last person I had that I was pretty much forced to hire. Very, very different. That was very hard for me. The one thing I realized that we both liked was scotch. So, so we did all of our meetings together with a different scotch each time to start our conversations. That's right. But we could barely have conversation. And so the way that I learned how to have conversation was to go to him with something that brings him joy or that brings a desire, because we were going to have to work with each other, whether he wanted to do this or not. And he very much had the idea that he was never going to get let go because the choir loved him, and he was high and mighty. He was up there. And if you ask the church, that choir would have loved to pay him way more than me. So in that was working relation, was learning to find those pieces of joy between each of us. And so once he found out that I was reaching out, he began to reach out in ways.
Okay, so it was reciprocated.
It was reciprocated.
Eventually.
Exactly. And so I then began to work with, get to know, have dinners with his family, Valerie and I both, going together. And so slowly bridging that gap that once was and learning how to talk, learning how to be with each other. And so as much as we find in the awkwardness, there's still holiness in the awkward, right? And so trying to find how to do that, where those joys are, to make that relationship deeper. But I know some of y'all pastors, and that y'all are in a hard position. I love y'all. I know some of y'all. Let's just be honest about it, right? Except Robert. Robert, you got the best one ever. I love that guy. Talk to him every week. But that is hard, and especially when you're talking about those power dynamics, when you may have been on a staff for 15 years and they're just now going into that, and they are very intimidated by what's going on, right?
They're various forms of power also.
Exactly. Right.
I mean, I guess we should at least acknowledge that.
Yes. And one mentor I once had, one of y'all in this room can tell me if I say this wrong, because it's in the armed forces where no matter how high up you are, you don't need to share with your staff your power, but they never need to forget your power. Is that correct, somebody in here?
Apparently.
Okay, yeah, something in that. I don't really agree with that often, because that still brings more of that power dynamic that causes friction, right? That you're still the one in power all the time. And so for me, I follow my sword a lot. And so this I should be probably telling to your boss, not your boss, sorry, the other senior ministers, I should be telling them they need to be learning and to learn to be more reciprocal to you all, and to fall on their swords at times that they don't need to be right, that they need to let you all do what y'all do because y'all are professionals at that, but they're not here.
Sure.
And so the best ways that we can be able to share that, to say we're in this together. But I also think, Doug, this is the difference from a certain generation of senior ministers too?
Tell us more.
What I see in my generation of senior ministers, my peers, it is not as much of intimidation. It's not as much of, I need to be in charge, do all the time. I mean, David's shaking his head. It is, we're going to fail, and this is going to be a horrible crap show if we don't work together. So let's figure out how to work together, because I got too much student debt. I need health care. I need to eat. I need to be able to work together because, that's the way that this is going to work out. And so I don't need to be intimidated by you because I trust you and I love you and you're there and we can do this. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of those pastors in some of the years, we're going to find them retiring and moving out, and you're going to see a totally different set of ways of working together. But and so that's why I have the most very troubling to answer a lot of these questions, because I do think it is a very big generational piece. And I could be wrong, but just knowing my peers and sets that I'm always with, it's not I mean, Robert said something beautiful earlier today about Kevin being able to ask him questions, and Robert saying, do you really want my full answer? And Kevin saying, yes, I want to know what you have to say. And coming together in a staff like that, that's what I see as senior ministers.
Well, maybe
that's hope.
That's a word of that's what I was going to say. Maybe that's a word of hope to end on, in a way.
And can I say one last thing? I know we got to go here. Let me say one last thing.
Don't want to quench the spirit, though.
But yes, that's right. Yeah. I have to give a deep gratitude for the music ministers and pianists and organists in my life. Right, so again, I said I was black. I grew up in the black church. I've always worked in predominantly white churches. So I remember my first chapel in undergrad, Adrian College in Michigan. There's about 10 black people out there because nobody wants to be in the snow. It's the coldest city in Michigan, right here. And we get there and we see God Me, Oh Thy Great Jehovah is on the chapel list. And we all get excited, and it's the 5 of us sitting there, and we stand up to sing, and all of a sudden we begin to sing, God Me, Oh Thy Great Jehovah, lead me to thy barren land. And then you all say, God. And the entire school turns and looks at us. And we're like, what the hell did we just do? And then they begin singing, God, me, oh, thy great Jehovah. And so from then on, I had to sit, every church that I worked with, I did a stint in the UCC through seminary and then went back to CBF. But I mean, sitting with Kerry Cannon and Daryl Robinson and Jeff Brummel and Todd Beanie, sitting with them to teach me these hymns. Because I didn't know them. I didn't know Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. We sung Rock of Ages today. The way that I would sing that growing up, Rock of Ages, clap for me. It was a different, and that was what you sung, at the start of church. It was very different. And so my gratitude as a pastor, and this is probably where my working relationship comes, is because I would literally fail in my position without you. Without the learnings, without sitting down and saying, well, this tune is this, and if you understand, you can see this meter here, and it goes with this. I mean, I'm sure Doug got so annoyed with me many a times, because in worst plan, I would just say, let's just do Speak, O Lord, and get over with, because it's the only one I knew. But that gratitude, and that is necessary, because that's necessary for those who are singing in the pews that don't know the songs, that are learning these songs and learning how important the theology of these songs are to who we are and who we are becoming. And so never forget why that's important. And never forget that there is a pastor sitting there that doesn't know one tune from the next, that needs a little help in that too. And so we're grateful. If they never say it, I'm going to tell you myself, we're grateful.
That's a good place to stop. Let's thank Timothy.